Welcome listeners to Off the Cuff with Namrita. Hope you're having a wonderful morning. And today I am so excited to talk to my guest, because she's a writer and every time I've, read her poetry, it resonates with me somehow because, what struck me about her personally was that she bridges the gap between the past and the present with so much of beautiful imagery. She uses those Hindi words sometimes, and what I get from her poetry is that she always has a sense of traditional thread that weaves a very modern and contemporary thought in her poetry. So I'd love to welcome Shikha Malaviya. She's an Indian American poet, writer, and publisher. She is co-founder of the Great Indian Poetry Collective, a membership model, press publishing powerful voices from India and the Indian diaspora. And she was selected as a poet laureate of San Ramon, California in 2016. And she's currently a Mosaic America Fellow committed to cultural collaborations in the San Francisco Bay Area and beyond. And Mosaic America is a wonderful organization we all know. So welcome Shikha to Off the Cuff with Namrita.
Thank you, Namrita. It's such an honor to be here. I'm so excited, and I've always admired your shows, and I can't believe I'm here with you in person.
It's my pleasure, Shikha. So, we have heard a lot about South Asian history, and we think that hey, most of the people who are in the Silicon Valley came through the tech wave, or
Right.
they were Sikh farmers who came in the 60s and 70s. But I think our history goes beyond that. And today you will be talking about such a person named Anandi Bai. So, and because you're also writing a book on her,
Right.
so tell our audience about Anandi Bai and why you chose to write on her.
Thanks, Namrita. Yeah. As you mentioned that when we look at immigrant history, we think of the Sikh farmers, because we're in California, we are actually aware of that.
Yes.
In other parts of the country, people aren't even aware of that.
Yes.
But I grew up in Minnesota in the 80s, 70s, late 70s and early 80s. And when I'd go to school, unfortunately, I faced a lot of racism. And they would say things like, which are very common for immigrants to hear, that phrase, go back to where you came from.
Okay.
And that sort of like becomes a groove in your mind, because when you constantly hear that, you start wondering yourself, where am I from? And my parents had a very strong sense of Indian identity, but they had immigrated to England, where I was born. That's where they met and got married. But they were both from Uttaranchal. They were both from Garhwal. But growing up, I just knew them. They were my beginning. They were my end in terms of the immigration story. But as I grew older and I started writing more and more poetry, I wanted to write about, our legacy, our roots. Where do we come from? That question had morphed into something else. And so it was around 2016, 2017 that I began searching and digging on the internet for who was the first woman to come here to the United States. And that's when I chanced upon Anandi Bai Joshee, also known as Anandi Gopal Joshee. And it was this photograph which had me riveted. It had 3 women doctors on it. Well, 3 women. One was a woman dressed in a sari, another was a woman dressed in a kimono, and the third was a woman who was dressed in what appeared to be Middle Eastern dress, like she had a headdress of coins.
Right.
And so I stared at this photograph and I was riveted, and underneath it said, Dr. Anandi Gopal Joshee. And so I was like, who is this woman? And she sat with her arms folded, and she had this determined look on her face. So I said, who is she? Ye kaun hai? Like, I need to know more about her. And that's when I discovered that apparently she was the first Indian woman to come to the United States, the first Indian woman to study medicine in the United States. And she came here in, I believe it was 1883.
Wow.
So I was like, there were people before us that came, right? So then I started digging into her story, and what I found was so fascinating to me because she was also torn between tradition and modernity, like many of us are still today.
Very
And so her story, even though it was over a century old, really resonated with me because I sort of grew up with the same thing, torn between tradition and modernity, which is what you see in my poetry as well, right?
Yes.
And then the things she had to do in order to come to the United States. She was born into a very traditional family, but her husband was a reformer of sorts, and he wanted to, educate her. But it was through his own, terms, right?
Yeah, and she married really early,
Yeah,
like 11 or something.
She was 9 years old.
9?
He was 16 years older.
Wow.
Yeah.
But yeah, that.
So the thing is, whatever stories we heard about her that came to us were all told in the lens of her husband being her savior.
Oh.
And
okay.
yeah, and so I thought, there is her voice in here somewhere, and so I thought, why not try to excavate her voice, bring her voice out, have her tell the story. And that's how I started writing poems in her imagined voice.
Wow.
So she's telling the story of her life through poetry. It's imagined by me, but I've used many of her words from her letters and things like that.
That is so amazing. And when is the book coming out, Shikha?
So the book is coming out with HarperCollins India next summer, 2023.
Oh, so
Yeah.
Best wishes for that. I think we all would love to read more stories from the South Asian history. And this I really didn't know about Anandi Bai actually. And we all should go back and learn about it so that we are more aware of our history and we learn from that. We shouldn't just think of India in terms of Bollywood and like vibrant festivals. Those are very good parts of India. But I think it's very important to learn about the unknown also.
Absolutely. I mean, even like when it comes to history, right? A lot of people will say we're not represented properly.
Yes.
But we can only be represented properly when we ourselves understand our own history as South Asian Americans. And there are archives like the South Asian American Digital Archive, SADA, and they're doing a phenomenal job of bringing, South Asian American history to us. There are so many fascinating stories, and even in my own research, like I found out there were so many circus performers that had come to the United States that the roots of modern